heart of a forgotten village, shrouded by dense, mist-filled forests, there stood an ancient mansion, once home to a wealthy family. The mansion had long been abandoned, and the villagers often spoke in hushed tones about the eerie happenings within its crumbling walls. Despite their warnings, a curious traveler named Sarah ventured into the village one cold, moonless night. Sarah had heard whispers of strange occurrences in the mansion, but she was not easily frightened. She had always been drawn to the unknown, fascinated by tales of the supernatural. As she approached the mansion, the wind howled through the trees, and a sense of foreboding washed over her. The iron gates creaked open, as if they had been waiting for her arrival. Inside, the mansion was silent. The air was thick with dust and decay, but Sarah felt an inexplicable pull to explore further. The grand staircase, though worn by time, still stood proudly, leading to the upper floors. As she climbed the stairs, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The faint sound of whispering voices reached her ears, but when she turned to look, there was no one there. She continued up the stairs, determined to uncover the source of the voices. The air grew colder with each step, and a shadow moved across the hallway in front of her. It was fleeting, like the movement of a figure just out of sight, but Sarah felt its presence deeply. She followed the shadow into a room at the end of the hall, its door creaking open with an unsettling groan. The room was unlike the others in the mansion. It seemed untouched by time, as if the air itself had been frozen. In the center stood an ornate mirror, its surface dark and cracked, reflecting not just Sarah's image, but the faint outline of something, or someone else. A chilling voice echoed through the room. "Leave now, or you will never leave." Sarah's heart raced as the voice grew louder, but her curiosity overpowered her fear. She reached out to touch the mirror. The moment her fingers made contact with the glass, a cold, invisible force grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the mirror. She struggled, but it was no use. The force was too strong. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and before she could react, she was pulled through. She found herself in a dark, desolate version of the mansion, a place where the walls seemed to breathe and whisper. The once beautiful rooms were now twisted and decayed, inhabited by figures that flickered in and out of existence. Sarah was trapped in a parallel realm, a place caught between life and death. The whispers grew louder, and the figures began to approach her, their faces twisted in agony. They were the souls of those who had once lived in the mansion, but something had gone horribly wrong. They had been cursed, bound to the mansion for eternity. Sarah realized that the curse was not just on the mansion, but on the souls trapped within it, and she had become part of their torment. One of the figures, a woman with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched into a grotesque grin, stepped forward. "You shouldn't have come," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. "Now you will join us." Sarah tried to run, but the mansion's corridors seemed to stretch on forever. No matter how fast she moved, the figures followed, closing in on her. Desperation took over as she searched for a way out. But every door she opened led to more darkness, more shadows. She could hear the whispers of the souls, their voices pleading for release, but their cries were drowned out by the overwhelming silence of the mansion. Then she heard a faint sound, a voice, soft and distant, calling her name. It was a voice she recognized. It was her mother's. Sarah. She followed the voice, her heart pounding. It led her to a small, hidden door at the far end of the mansion. She pushed it open, and the voice grew louder. Beyond the door was a small, forgotten room, where a single candle flickered in the corner, casting long shadows on the walls. And in the center of the room was a dusty, old book. The book seemed to call to her. She approached it cautiously, her hands trembling as she opened the cover. The pages were filled with ancient symbols and words that made no sense. But as she scanned the pages, one word stood out: escape. As soon as she read the word, the room began to tremble violently. The shadows that had been tormenting her seemed to retreat, but a new presence filled the space, a presence darker, colder, more malevolent. The book in her hands glowed fiercely, its pages turning on their own, as though something was forcing them to move. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, becoming deafening. The air grew thick with an oppressive, unnatural weight. The room spun around her, and Sarah felt a violent pull in her chest, as though something inside her was being ripped apart. She fell to her knees, clutching the book tightly, her mind reeling. Then, as if a door had opened, Sarah was pulled from the room and hurled back through the twisted corridors of the mansion. The walls around her warped, their surfaces melting into dark shapes and faces. The mansion was no longer the same place. It was shifting, moving, changing, as though it had a life of its own. And then, just as quickly as it began, everything stopped. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The dark figures that had been chasing her were gone. The mansion was still, silent, as though it had never been alive to begin with. Sarah looked around, bewildered. She was no longer in the twisted version of the mansion. She was back in the same room with the mirror, but this time it was whole and undistorted. There was no crack, no dark reflection. She reached for it, her hand trembling. Before she could touch the mirror, a voice echoed from behind her. "You're not done yet." Sarah spun around. A man stood in the doorway, an unfamiliar figure with dark eyes, wearing a suit that seemed out of place in such a haunted mansion. His presence was cold, unsettling. His gaze locked with hers. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," he said with a smirk, stepping closer. "You thought you escaped, but you've only just begun." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, stepping back. The man smiled. "I'm the one who has been watching you all along, the one who invited you here. You see, this mansion, this place is not just haunted by the souls of the past. It's haunted by something much darker, something that was never meant to be set free." Sarah's heart raced as she realized the truth. The mansion wasn't just cursed. It had been built on the site of an ancient ritual. a ritual that centuries ago had torn open a doorway to another world, a world where dark entities lived. The souls of the mansion were the unfortunate victims of this ritual, trapped in the liminal space between worlds. But Sarah, unknowingly, had triggered the final phase of the ritual by reading from the book. She hadn't escaped. She had only released something far worse. The man's grin widened, and he stepped closer, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the floor. Now it's too late. The doorway is open, and what's on the other side is coming. And you, Sarah, are the key.